We're going to Minnesota.
We're going to Minnesota.
We're going to head down there now because we have our first guest of the night. She is the co-host of the Bardown Beauties podcast, NHL.com writer, Jessi Pierce. Welcome to the show. Jessi, we're going to be talking about a lot of hockey tonight, but I want to get into something a little different to start it off, and that is your tweet that you sent out the other day about gravy. Let's talk Thanksgiving. Can you tell me about... Now, again, Jessi, we're going to get into some hockey. Again, I said this, but tell me about your Thanksgiving hot takes, because I said this is really interesting to me.
Easily the most controversial take that I think I have ever tweeted out, apparently. It triggered a lot of people. And, you know, I probably kind of expected that. You know, I get that. You guys will love this. As Canadians, though, I do allow gravy on my poutine, right? Like, I do love that.
Thank you.
It's not poutine if there's no gravy.
Yeah, it's just
exactly,
cheese fries.
Right? Which is fine. I love me some cheese curds. That's a whole other thing. But, no, my mashed potatoes, I make some bomb mashed potatoes. They don't need the gravy. I make some bomb turkey. Doesn't need the gravy. Not a gravy person. I understand that that's like the iconic sort of side dish. I think it's a side, right? It's like a side. It's a side to your thing. And I'm not a person. I'm also that weirdo. I hate my food touching. So Thanksgiving has usually been like a huge travesty for me anyway, because I need everything sectioned. Gravy just muddles it all together too. And it's just, it's not my cup of tea. I'm not a fan.
And you had a pie take as well, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember reading correctly. What was your pie take?
I do. And I love me some cherry pie all day, every day. I prefer pie over cake, even. Like, I'm not a big cake person, but I love some cherry pie. I like fruit pies mostly. Apple pie's okay, but pumpkin pie, unless there's a heavy, heavy amount of whipped cream mixed into that sucker, I'll pass on it.
Jessi, just throw some gravy on it. I promise. It's really, really good.
Yeah, you haven't tried pumpkin pie.
That is my nightmare.
My favorite picture is you're not eating pumpkin pie unless it looks like this, and it's like literally like a block of whipped cream with like a little.
It looks like the
of
Michelin Man with feet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
That.
The Minnesota Wild, Jessi, they're off to a hot start. Now, when you were on the Rod Peterson show with us a few weeks ago, I think the Wild were off to a 4-1 start. Clearly, things have continued to go pretty good for them in the Central Division. So I guess give us a synopsis of the first, 20-ish games or so of the season.
Yeah, I mean, like you had mentioned, they started off hot. They were looking really good. Minnesota was all on board. Like, we're going undefeated. We're winning 82 games this year. Get the parade route going. Kirill Kaprizov is here. It did turn out that way, right? They lost a couple games. I think the biggest thing that you could put a mark on the Minnesota Wild is you could call them resilient if you want to be positive. You could also call them inconsistent if you want to be a little bit more negative. They seem to be very, very inconsistent. The one constant rather is the first period seems to be a very flat period. Minnesota a lot of times tends to show up in the third, which is great if you're a fan and you're watching them come back after they pull a goalie for a 6-on-5 and score 2 goals and force overtime or come within, a goal of winning. It's exciting hockey, but it's also, you'd love to see a complete 60. I can name 2 games, I think, this season where I've seen Minnesota play truly a complete 60. And again, some of those comebacks have turned in their favor. A lot of those comebacks, in fact, have turned in their favor. But the biggest question is, how sustainable is that really? You can't continue to do it. Somehow they've made it work this far along into the season because, again, they're winning out and they're doing well. But it's got to give. They got to figure out how to put together the full 60 in order to really make their mark in a tough Central. We all know how the Central goes. It's up and down, and you need to grab every point that you possibly can. So you're going to have to get the first period start figured out a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say 18 games in, they're 11-6-1, 23 points. Currently, I guess, on top of the Central, but there's 4 points between them and Colorado in 5th. So it's a really tight Central, which includes Max's Nashville Predators. And I'll let him get to that in a second because I know he has a kind of a related question. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that kind of happened in the offseason. A couple of really key guys who have been there for a while have moved on. There's some young guys emerging. What would you say has been kind of a couple of really big positives early on? Because I know you said the year's inconsistency, there's slow starts, but what has been a couple of really glimmering, hopeful things going on?
I mean, I think the depth. You had mentioned some of the young guys, right? There is excitement coming and brewing down in Iowa in the American Hockey League with Matt Boldy, who unfortunately was hurt during preseason there. So he's down in Iowa. Marco Rossi still down in Iowa. 2 players that have been circled on rosters and at training camp as guys that are going to be very impact players for the Wild. down the road. I mean, of course, there's chances that we'll see glimpses of them this season, but those are two certainly big futures. Ryan Hartman, though, I think he is my big shining star. I mean, he's consistent. There's a guy that can score pretty consistently, and he's scoring big goals, and it's so much fun to watch. He's a very versatile player. He can be on the wing, he can be up the middle. I personally like him better as a center, which is an area that, as we all know, Minnesota desperately needs to find a true number one center. Not saying that Ryan Hartman's that guy, but he's definitely provided a great spark. He's cheap too, which is really, really fun. Like, he's very underpaid for how well he's performing. So, I mean, again, that speaks to the depth. You also look at the fourth line, Nico Sturm, Brandon Duhaime, who made his NHL debut this year. Even Nick Bukestad jumping in there as well. I mean, those fourth line guys and even the third line are doing really well, which is even more important when you have guys like Kirill Kaprizov, who continue to be snake bitten, and Kevin Fiala, who's really struggling to find the goals. I think the depth is really the biggest part that's really surprised me a little bit and really given me a lot of hope for this Minnesota Wild squad moving forward.
Well, Jessi, the connections certainly don't stop for the Minnesota Wild and Nashville Predators. You know the old saying, or I guess the new saying, the road to Minnesota goes through Nashville, with ownership all the way down behind the bench to a few players on the squad. Nick Bonino with a pit stop there last year. Kevin Fiala being a younger piece there, in addition to the aforementioned Ryan Hartman. But the Fiala slow start. Still 12 points in 18 games. Now, we are starting to see some rumors flying. Is there a lot of smoke to this? Is there something that we should really be paying attention for in the immediate future from Bill Guerin when it comes to this this player who's, again, still younger, 1 year, $5.1 million and an RFA at the end of the year? But what do you make of Kevin Fiala, and is he the most expendable piece on this Wild team at the moment?
I mean, I think he's going to be the one that will yield you the most return. So if they're looking for somebody that can come in immediately, Kevin Fiala is the guy that would go. I mean, beyond kind of his lack of production early on, again, we saw what he was capable of doing last season and even a little bit the year before. But I think really it started in this offseason when the Minnesota Wild decided to take Kevin Fiala to arbitration and said, hey, man, we're going to force this on you. And then, you know, while they're signing big contracts and big checks to guys like Joel Eriksson Ek, who got an 8-year deal, Kirill Kaprizov, obviously, who's got the $9 million a year, Kevin Fiala got the 1 year for 5.5, which kind of says a lot about what management's thinking about him, right? You know, are they willing to move forward? So, I mean, I think even that offseason kind of, not tirade, but, you know, some of that stuff that happened in the offseason is even more telling. I mean, Kevin Fiala had mentioned to us at training camp that he was coming in with, as quote, fire in his eyes, because he did probably take a little bit of offense that Bill Guerin and management didn't want to lock him in for a longer term deal, because he's a guy that is looking for a home. He wants to make Minnesota a home, I believe. But I don't know that Minnesota necessarily wants that. And as we see kind of a couple more rifts starting to form, Fiala's been taken off the power play. He's been taken off the penalty kill. He's been short shifted a little bit too, and pulled out in circumstances. And I think a lot of that has to do with not necessarily just, again, his lack of production, but also part of it, Kevin plays a very mental game, and he gets, you know, he needs to mature still a little bit. I think we are seeing growths and strides, but I think sometimes that immaturity comes out in stupid penalties and in, you know, passes that are being forced and in gripping the stick too tightly. So I think that's a part of the reason you're seeing them pull back on Fiala and just trying to figure out what to do. They've tried to give him different pieces to get him going. It hasn't worked. So I think that's why you're seeing the rumors fly around about JT Miller or Bo Horvat in exchange for Fiala, which I think would be a fair trade. I'm curious to see what kind of continues to transpire about that.
That sounds really intriguing, and I'm going to be refreshing Twitter a lot now that you mentioned it. One guy that I've always been a little fascinated by, just in the NHL in general, but now he's on the Wild, is Matt Zuccarello. And this guy, in the last 56 games that he's played, he has 48 points. It seems like when he got back in the lineup last year, Kaprizov really started blasting off. And that's just what I noticed. But from what you've seen, what does he mean for this lineup? He's a little dynamic, you know, kind of a feisty little guy, and he just seems to do nothing but put up solid point production.
I mean, the vision that he has on the ice and the way that he can find Kaprizov, like those two, the chemistry is absolutely undeniable. Again, unfortunately, it hasn't completely transpired in more goals for Kirill, but Zuccarello is still setting him up. And, you know, when the two of them are together, it's dynamic. It's really, really fun to watch. Again, you're still missing that guy up the middle that can kind of be that finishing piece that they both need. But no, Zuccarello has been really fun to watch. He's great on the power play as well. He's kind of their PP specialist, I would say. And it, you know, took him a little bit to get get going. But I think once he did, he really hasn't stopped. I mean, you noticed when he was out in COVID protocol early on in the season, he's a guy that the Minnesota Wild absolutely need. And I think he's starting to just feel, in general, more comfortable here in Minnesota. This was his first training camp because he didn't come in until later last year. So you can see he's really acclimated. He really loves Kirill. They're buddies. I love that they hype each other up all the time. I'm just looking forward to more goal connections on behalf of Kaprizov, because obviously a lot of pressure on that kid to put the puck in the net.
So, Jessi, and again, I can't help but talk about it. Whenever we go up and down this roster, there's Nashville Predators connections absolutely littered throughout it. And Nashville Predators Twitter was ablaze when Rem Pitlick was placed on waivers kind of midway through camp this year. 7 points in 9 games, has scored some big goals. What have you made of Rem Pitlick's transition to Minnesota, albeit in a small sample size to begin?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, it's a small sample size, and he has had challenge after challenge thrown his way. I mean, I remember when they scooped him up on waivers, and Richard Park, who had scored, the infamous goal for Minnesota back against the Colorado Avalanche in the Western Conference Finals there, he was the guy that said, I want Rem no matter what. So they kind of just pissed.
Okay, so Jessi, I don't know if she can still hear us, but we lost her mic right in mid-sentence. So something happened there. We'll get her reconnected. We'll get her back on, and we'll let her finish about Rem.
I got to know that answer, man.
I know.
I'm not kidding you when I said that Twitter exploded
I saw
in
it.
Nashville Predators universes, and
I am not even a fan of the Preds, and I'm not even, I don't follow nearly as many accounts that you follow. I saw it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is a guy that the organization poured a lot into, and it was just very interesting to see how that went about. And I mean, it's one of those things where, again, you've seen it time again in Toronto. You don't think a guy will get claimed. There's always that verbal agreement with the GMs. There's Adam Brooks. But Rem Pitlick was a guy that a lot of Nashville Predators fans were starting to see as, you know what, this could be a guy that at the very least, could be a middle six forward for years to come. A guy that would have been on a cheap, inexpensive deal. A guy that still, again, had that potential to put the puck in the net. And we're seeing it in Minnesota. He's got that chip on his shoulder. He wants to prove that he can stick in this league. And again, with a hat trick in one of his games already, man, oh man, it's I'm. Again, to my chagrin, the Minnesota Wild make yet another stealthy move with the Nashville Predators. But hey, we got Mikael Granlund. So
did Frederick Gaudreau play in Nashville too?
Freddie Gaudreau did play in Nashville, yeah.
So he's another one. I mean, it is interesting how
honestly,
many
when you look up and down this lineup, man, it is absolutely crazy to see the connections.
Who are the management connections?
So they had who was the 1 year there? The
quick 1 year guy.
Yeah, the quick. I can't remember. Again, he was quick. He was in and out like a fiddler's elbow. I can't remember exactly who it is.
Jessi would know.
Exactly, Jessi will know. But Craig Leopold, the owner,
the owner,
and Dean Evison was the coach of the Milwaukee Admirals for 6+ seasons. So I mean, again, it's just so many connections to Nashville Predators up and down throughout the lineup, and just the organization as a whole.
All right, well, let's get Jessi back on. We should have her. Jessi, who was the
Paul Fenton?
Paul Fenton. There we go.
Thank
you.
See,
it was a quick stop. It was not very memorable.
No, I've heard.
I just wanted to get you guys really hooked, and then I was like, all right, we're out.
Yeah, we're out. See ya.
We'll talk about Rem in a minute. No, Paul Fenton is
yes, and I've heard
not
some stories.
Quite liked here.
There was a really good article about Paul Fenton that I read that was really good.
So good article.
Well, yeah, it was good for content purposes, but yeah, probably not for him. Anyways, go ahead. Max was really foaming at the mouth with this Rem Pitlick talk.
I know, right? No, I mean, so yeah, they scooped him up, and again, it was surprising in respect to the other guys that had been working their butt off. I equated it to, I'm sure you guys have seen Miracle, when they bring Timmy Haar in, and all of a sudden you're like, well, what the heck? He hasn't been with us the whole time. And that was no disrespect to Rem. I just didn't know much more about him beyond what he had done with the University of Minnesota Gophers. And, there's the whole Minnesota loves Minnesota boys. Alex Goligoski, Nick Bukestad, they're prime examples of that. And while that's all sweet, you're always kind of like, are we just doing this because he's a Minnesota guy? Apparently he can score too, which is really fantastic to see. Hat trick in his first game. I mean, again, the challenges being he comes in late to camp, he goes into COVID protocol, but that hasn't slowed him one bit. He looks absolutely tremendous out there. Again, he's another piece of that depth that I had been talking about. And you're glad it worked out because they couldn't put him back on waivers because you knew Nashville was coming right back for him had they done that. So I'm really glad that it worked out, especially for some of those younger guys that are now in Iowa as a result of it. But, I think Rem Pitlick has really fit very, very nicely into this lineup.
So we talked about kind of the Paul Fenton in the 1 year, and there's been some changes with the Wild recently, management and coaching staff, and obviously we talked about the player changes as well with Suter and Parise out the door, among others. But Dean Evason is a guy who really came in and seems to have kind of set the tempo with this franchise. In the bubble season, to me, I thought they overachieved a little bit, but every time I heard about them and, heard people like yourself who know what they're watching and talking about, it's like, no, these guys are actually kind of the real deal. And I was like, okay, I feel like I just don't see it. Where's it coming from? And I feel like Dean Evason might be a big part of that. Can you maybe touch on that?
I mean, I think you're right. And, credit to him because I kind of had low expectations for him. I was like, he's not going to make it past interim. That interim tag is going to stick. They're going to find somebody else. I mean, just because, again, you'd never seen him really perform at that level. You didn't know what he was all about. And, he kind of just gave you the same Muldrum answers of, well, anybody in a Wild jersey can play with anybody in a Wild jersey. And hey, we're a team and yada, yada. And sure. But it's worked. I mean, not to say that teams of past weren't cohesive, but this is the first time in my 6 years of covering the Minnesota Wild that I do see a very cohesive unit. The guys are really in it together. And sure, COVID years probably made that a lot harder, right, for teams to come together. But there's just something different about guys that are willing to play for each other. And that just feels so apparent. And that's a big thing that Dean continues to push. And it sounds, very youthful in nature. And it's kind of, roll your eyes. Oh, sure. But it works. I mean, they want to go out and play for a guy like Dean. And, and I think the other big thing that Dean Evason does that I haven't seen a coach really do here yet in Minnesota or really in a lot of places is that he's willing to make the tough calls and bench a guy. He's willing to sit Kevin Fiala. He's willing to move Kirill Kaprizov to the third line because he needs a kick in the butt. He's willing to pull a guy like Zach Parise out of the lineup and bench him as a healthy scratch. I mean, that takes some cojones to do, right? And I mean, it sends a message up and down the lineup that you need to earn your spot. I mean, Billy Guerin starting up with him as GM, he said he wants to create competition. He wants guys to be competing for those spots and to prove that they deserve it. And that trickles down to Dean, who also makes that competition really thrive. And, I think it's just really worked out. These guys want to play for him. A lot of them have prior connections with him, Kevin Fiala being one. Brandon Duhaime knows him a little bit. So, I mean, that I think helps too. But yeah, Dean has really done a great job in kind of shifting the culture. And he hates when we say that, but that's really what it is. He's shifted this culture in Minnesota, which then has translated onto on ice success as well.
So, Jessi, we've kind of covered at least a little bit of everything when it comes to the forward corps and behind the bench and everything. But last year, a big storyline with the Minnesota Wild, and I don't want to say overachieved, but again, as you alluded to with the reasons of maybe the lack of certainty with Dean Evason, what he would be able to accomplish, the goaltending. Kaapo Kähkönen, Cam Talbot. Obviously, it's getting the wins to start the year, but certainly not the most stable in net, at least not what we saw last year from them. Can you comment on maybe what's been a little bit different that's transpired in a bit of a slower start despite piling up some wins?
Yes, and I'm going to have to record this because I have been fighting with my co-host about this for the past few weeks because she's very all on board thinking the goaltending's fine, whereas I have, since the beginning, been a little questionable. I'm not as secure in this tandem as I was last year. Now, a lot of that goes into, let's start with Kaapo Kähkönen, right, who played outstanding when he absolutely needed to, when Cam Talbot was hurt or when Cam Talbot was in protocol, because going into last season, Bill Guerin made it very, very apparent, in fact, came out right and said Cam Talbot is our number one. So that was going to be the goal. Cam gets hurt. Cam goes into COVID protocol. Kaapo has to step in. A rookie goaltender has to step in, and he does absolutely phenomenal. Did just a fantastic job. However, as Cam started to make his way back, we saw Cam really step up and perform as the goalie that he had sworn he was going to be in the offseason when Bill Guerin signed him and brought him into the organization. So that was really great. Then you saw Kaapo kind of falter. He, lets in 9 goals in Colorado, lets in 8 goals in St. Louis, and he just never really found his footing back. That continued on to the first couple of games of season. He finally got a win under his belt a couple games ago, 2 in a row, in fact, which was really, really great for him. You could tell that he needed that confidence boost. I mean, he's a very calm goaltender, which I think is really, really nice. I know the defense really appreciates that about him, but he still is a very rookie goaltender. So you have that as your backup. And then Cam still looks a little shaky to start this year out. I mean, I'm hoping he can figure it out. It's still early. It's still a small sample size, as we can say, up and down the lineup. But yeah, I mean, Cam Talbot doesn't look like the guy that he was last year, the guy that really helped carry this team. He certainly hasn't lost any games, but he hasn't stolen any games either, in my opinion. And I think with the defensive changes that have taken place this year, whether it was Ryan Suter going out, you don't have that third pairing of Ian Cole and Carson Soucy, who were so strong last year. You're seeing the puck get past a little bit more because you're seeing some of those letdowns maybe on that third pairing, and Cam has to be stout and ready every night. And I just don't have the confidence in him. He reminds me a lot of former Minnesota Wild goaltender Devin Dubnyk, actually, in some of the goals that he lets in, where it's like, oh, you should have had that. But then he'll follow it up with like a ridiculous save, and that's all fine and well. But yeah, I mean, I need to see him steal a game or two before I really start to think that Talbot is, because otherwise this tandem to me is just kind of so-so. It's not terrible. It's just not what it was last year.
Talbot's sitting at a .905 save percentage as of today with a .295, whereas Kokkonen's an .870 and a .330. So you definitely want those numbers to get up. And just talking about Kokkonen, we had a lot of debates in the offseason that he was going to be the guy that Seattle was going to take in the draft. They end up taking, you mentioned Carson Soucy. And one thing that the Wild have always had for the last multiple years is a really good group on the blue line, for the most part. Brodin and Spurgeon have been there forever. Dumba,
Ryan Suter
among
was
others.
there too.
Ryan Suter, I guess.
Right, hey?
But they always had a really solid, group. Maybe it wasn't superstar level, but really good. Is that still the same, even though they lost Carson Soucy? You said Ian Cole's out the door. They brought in Goligoski, a couple other guys to kind of fill some spots. How has that been?
I mean, it's been good. Ryan Suter obviously leaves a pretty big hole to fill. The minutes that man ate up, I mean, that was a lot. But Alex Goligoski has really slotted in very nicely against Jaron Spurgeon for that first pair. So that's been really good. I think the biggest difference you're seeing in this defense, and again, that is a credit to Dean Evson's coaching, is the way that they push the pace. With Ryan Suter, you saw a much slower defense, they'd stay back. The back checking they weren't as confident, it seemed, in the back checking necessarily. Whereas this offense pushes the pace. Goligoski is very ready to step in and take some shots, whereas that used to be just a Matt Dumba thing. None of the other defensemen really got involved in the play up on offense. So I think that's the biggest change. But I think Goligoski and Spurgeon now obviously out with a lower body who's week to week, hopefully not too serious. It doesn't sound like it, but that's going to hurt. They're really good. Broads and Dumba have been playing together forever, so they know each other really well. The thing with Dumba naturally is big risk, big reward. I mean, he's a guy that can turn the puck over just atrociously, but he can also do really good things with it too. So, I mean, it's kind of a give and take there. And then, Dimitri Kulakov and John Merrill have been surprisingly good. I think, again, they were a pair that I was kind of like, I don't know. It felt like Guerin went to the recycle bin for them and kind of just got them at the cheap. And but they performed much better than I anticipated. But now, you're looking to see, is Jordy Ben coming in, which he has not been performing well at all. He's played just 2 games for the Minnesota Wild. Or do you look at a guy like Kaelyn Addison, who they did recall from Iowa, who's still a young guy? And how does that kind of fit in with Spurgeon? But all in all, it's a different look defensively. Again, a much more offensively charged defense, which is something that Minnesota is not used to seeing, going back to the Jacques Lemieux days, right? I think Jacques would be cringing watching the defense play nowadays in Minnesota. But it's definitely given, it's a more exciting Minnesota team too, which is always nice, a breath of fresh air.
For our WHL fans, Kaelyn Addison, of course, former Lethbridge Hurricane, if I'm not mistaken, involved with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then Pittsburgh. Did he get drafted by Minnesota?
Yep,
Pittsburgh first, and then traded.
No, he was drafted by Pittsburgh.
To Minnesota.
Yep.
And was that in the Zucker trade?
That was in the Zucker trade. Yep.
Look at me. My brain still works.
Round. Look at you. Yeah. Good work.
One thing I just wanted to bring up, because you mentioned Matt Dumba. He was a guy, and then I think we're going to have one more question for you. But Matt Dumba was a guy. Yeah. He was getting traded every week up here in Canada. I guess it's different up here in Canada because every team in Canada is always trading for everyone up here. So Matt Dumba was the guy for literally the Canucks fans thought they were getting him, the Oilers fans for a bit, the Flames fans, literally every fan base. As a Leafs fan, he was very high on our list every year. Is that kind of settled down? Because, again, there's been a lot of rumors about him, but I haven't heard as much lately. Is that settled down? Is he kind of maybe going to stay there now?
It seems so. Yeah, I mean, it was rampant down here. I think we had to ask him about it constantly. And he's like, I don't know, guys. And we're like, we know you know. He's very active on social media. Right. We know he's aware of it. No, but it's definitely quieted down. I think other players have really taken the attention off of him. Not that he's completely out of the wheelhouse. There's been quite a few goals that have been a result, again, of some of those turnovers where it's just he's not smart play. But I think the difference is, going back to the growth and maturity. Matt Dumba's really matured. I mean, he got the A on his chest for a reason this year after the departure of Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. And in particular, one of those goals that he did let in where Minnesota lost by a goal, the accountability for him to stand up there and say, you know what, that was completely on me. And again, it's not, because Wild should have scored another goal regardless. But for him to take that accountability, I think it's really gotten kind of the fan base and management back on the Matt Dumba train. So I don't think we'll probably be hearing too much of those rumors swirl up, especially while Kevin Fiala or a guy like Jordan Greenway continues to kind of take that away and take the attention off of Dumbs for that.
Well, I tell you what, Jessi, greatly appreciate your time tonight, and I apologize for the Thanksgiving pun, but thank you for talking turkey with us tonight. With that being said, though, it's National Jersey Day here in Canada. Oh. We're also celebrating a holiday. It seems to be anyways, as the Team Canada jerseys for the Olympics have leaked online. I'm not too sure if it's been an official release or not.
Well, I don't know. Can you guys flash that up for Jessi in case she hasn't seen it yet, the Team Canada jerseys? Jessi, you'll see it over your face there. Those are the Olympic jerseys, allegedly.
Okay.
So
okay. We're loving black, huh? Like people are just all in on the all black situation. Can we talk about Jersey?
Well, we showed that earlier.
Exactly,
so I don't know. Flash up the New Jersey jersey with the jersey on the jersey.
And who just happens to be playing the Minnesota Wild tomorrow? There's that. Right? But the New Jersey Devils.
Oh yeah.
So
exactly.
What are your thoughts on this one before we bring up our next jersey that we want to talk about?
I mean, I go back and forth, right? We get so on the NHL for being kind of so boring and not trying new things. So they tried something new. I'll leave it at that. I technically employed by the NHL, so no. I mean,
great job.
I don't hate it as much as everybody else does, but it leaves a lot left on the table. I think it's just kind of very.
I said this to Max earlier. I said once I saw players in it with their names and numbers and everything, it grew a little on me, but it definitely, there was a bit of a shock and awe thing going on at the beginning, I think.
Yeah, and Jessi, we'll just leave it at the fact of it looks like gravy on your Thanksgiving dinner. We'll just leave people to insinuate it at that. But anyways, the Minnesota Wild obviously have a new jersey that they released in the summer ahead of the Winter Classic this coming winter at Target Field. What do you make of those jerseys?
You can flash that one up too, guys. There it is. Look at Jared.
It's grown on me. I like a lot of elements, but I think, and I like the full package with the breezers, which I know you guys call them pants, but that's wrong. They're called breezers. With the breezers, with the socks, with the gloves. It's a thing. I didn't either until I had some Canadian friends, and they're like, "What are you talking about?"
Well, I didn't know what you meant either, so that's interesting.
Yeah, they're hockey pants. That's what we call it. It's a Minnesota thing, I guess. We like to be different. Teaching you something new. No, together as the full package, it looks sharp. I think where it kind of got me, and I was there for the unveiling, it's a lot. It's very, very busy. Like they were really pulling in all of kind of the 1920s, and they're trying to, make Minneapolis and St. Paul, which if you guys aren't aware, they're two very different cities in Minnesota, and people get very upset about that. It's like calling Minnesota mini. It starts a whole thing. They're very separate. Yes.
I've learned so much in this last 2 minutes.
We'll have to do a full episode where I just teach you guys about Minnesota hockey culture, right?
Yeah.
No, so I mean, I like it though. I like what they were trying to go for. And again, as the complete package, I think it'll look really nice. It just is a little busy for me. What did you guys think?
Well sorry, Clark, elbow patches or no elbow patches, Jessi. That's the kicker for me. Is it could have done without those? Like you said, it's too much extras.
Yeah,
it's just
the one that got me was the chest stripe. That's
stripe.
The one that got me.
Yes.
The rest of the stripes I'm fine with, I think, but the chest stripe threw me off.
But if you take the chest stripe out, then you can actually make the C on Spurgeon's sweater look like an actual C as well. We're just going to dissect the entire thing here, Jessi.
Let's redesign it.
You're not wrong. Yeah, just redesign it. That's what was terrible. It was kind of funny because so they had these designed before the last Winter Classic that got shut down. So it's like they couldn't go back and change anything.
Oh, look at this. So we got the double side. There's the elbow patches you were asking for.
Yeah, those elbow patches are just...
Yeah. And again, to me, if they just took the top stripe off, I feel like it'd just be that much better, but I don't know. Anyways, Jessi, we should let you go. I know it's a big week for you down there, so we'll let you get back to the non-gravy Thanksgiving. And we'll hopefully do this again because this was fantastic.
Thank you very much, Jessi.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
have a good one.
All right, and our guests, as always, are brought to you by our friends and your friends, hopefully, one day at IKS Media, IKS Live, bringing you the best in broadcasting, live events, video screens, live entertainment, and so much more. Visit iksmedia.ca.